Hello, everybody. Welcome to UK CORRAL, the podcast that reviews every single British comic ever written by a British writer. I'm your co-host, Michael, and as always, I'm joined by Adamantium.
Waka waka.
And of course, Nice Man.
I'll be nice tonight.
All right, for once, right? There's a first time for everything. Anyway, no Neil Gaiman, no Mark Miller. It's Alan Moore. It's Captain Britain Part 3. This is covering comics that were reprinted in X-Men Archives numbers 6 and 7, and originally published in Mighty World of Marvel. And let me just see if they were all in Mighty World of Marvel, because I'm not sure. Yes, all the way up to number 13. And then after this, I believe Alan Davis took over as writer. But we're only talking about the Alan Moore issues. This is wrapping up the Alan Moore Captain Britain comics that we've reviewed over the course of 2 previous episodes, and then this one. So how about this? Since we usually rotate on summarizing, we're going to quickly summarize. We're not going to go page by page, not going to go panel by panel, but we're just going to quickly tell you what happens in each chapter and then talk about it briefly, okay? So in the first one, we open up with a scene of 2 characters talking to each other. Now, it has been a long time since we read the previous batch, so I am kind of losing track of characters. So if I forget who anyone is, just let me know. But we are jumping out of the main kind of like timeline, not timeline, like figuratively the timeline, and we're having 2 characters talking about Captain Britain as kind of like almost like a legendary figure. Like they're talking about a scene that happened where a bunch of people were standing in a food line and they saw Captain Britain, and what they end up describing is how these almost like ice, like super ice stormtrooper guards were interrogating somebody. They start beating them up. Captain Britain steps in to intervene. And the interesting thing is that as these characters are telling, one character's telling the story to the other, we see that he starts to exaggerate what happens in the story, and the visuals match exactly what he's saying. So for example, here in this page, and then and by the way, these shock troopers are called Beetles. And then all of the Beetles rushed him at once. All of them. You said there were only 2. Oh, did I? I must have forgot about the others. Actually, there were about 30. And then all of a sudden we see the panel change right here, which is very clever, I think, on the part of Alan Moore and Alan Davis. Then we see, then he says, beat them. He slaughtered them. At the end, he was fighting on top of a pile of bodies, 50 men deep. You said 30. No, I didn't. There were hundreds of them. And now we see an obviously impossible tall pile of these Beetle characters. And then in the last panel, we see that there actually were only 2. So that's probably what the actual, how the events occurred. So we see them kind of finish up this this story. It ends with Captain Britain, them kind of like describing what others have said happened to Captain Britain. Someone else said that they were going to storm through the streets and crush all the Beetles, and nothing could stop them, and we could all be free. And somebody said he'd been killed, and someone said he'd been tortured and informed on all his friends. And then it kind of it cuts back to the end of the story, and they continue talking, and then the story kind of just wraps up, and then we are to assume, and then it cuts to this nice, it kind of pans out or zooms out to this shot of them clearly in like this concentration camp being guarded by these Beetles. And it's a great little, how many pages is that? 11 pages? Even less. And it's brilliant, I think. Like, what a great way, especially since we've been away from these stories for like, I think over a month or 2 months. What a great way to bring us back in. I thought it was brilliant. Adamantium, what do you think?
I know this was really well done. In fact, I'm going to kind of go ahead with my final thoughts on this, which is that preceding this, every Alan Moore story we've been reading has felt very proto-Alan Moore, that didn't quite have the level of maturity or nuance that his later scripts would have that I would really appreciate. And yet I think with this arc that we're reading, he's achieved it. This is Alan Moore really coming into his own and being the type of writer that he's going to be known as. And I think the clever displacement of the narrative that Mike was talking about represents that, where it jumps from two people telling a story about Captain Britain and it exploding into these sort of deviations of what the narrative is, and you have to question how true it is or not. And there's a secondary thing happening where you're being exposed to this dystopian world, which we didn't see in previous issues. It was alluded to in some sort of, I think it was a trans-universal, like, dimension-hopping adventure where there was like a dark timeline that Captain Britain was participating in. And this is it. This is kind of the coming of that timeline for their current world. And they're showing the destitution and what's happening in London without directly saying it, but just through this background of all these characters and these food lines, the oppression of these SS-style Beetle soldiers, and then the final shot of Mad Jim Jaspers and his face plastered on that billboard overlooking London, showing the dominance of his tyrannical reign. It's impressive. And it's contrasted with the Union Jack right above it for this very chilling, very cold image. It's funny, it's thought-provoking, it's very subtle in the way it's telling its story and projecting what this world is. And so that's why I think this shows Alan Moore has reached maturation at this point. This is where Alan Moore is starting to tell stories like Alan Moore.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Nice Man, what do you think?
I have so many good things to say about this, I don't know where to begin. I think first thing to say is congratulations to Len Wein, the former Marvel editor-in-chief, writer for Marvel, writer for DC, editor for DC. Because I think if I were an editor at Marvel or DC, and I bothered to read this stuff. This is appearing in the mighty world of Marvel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So Marvel already had a head start on DC in seeing what was being produced in the British Marvel editions. Mm-hmm. And if I were an editor, I would immediately pick up the phone and long distance call Alan Moore and Alan Davis and say, absolutely, you have to do some work on an American produced, Marvel comic. But it was Len Wein of DC who said, hey, come and write Swamp Thing. And you can see, I'm almost like speechless because this is early Alan Moore. Could you tell a tale any better than this? I almost don't think so. So you begin, like you said, well, we want to kind of recap. How should we kind of recap things? We're going to have two imprisoned characters. They're going to be exchanging a cigarette, which adds to the mood and atmosphere. We're going to do a 9-panel page. You mean like Ditko? Like 9 panels, Amazing Spider-Man? Yes and no. 9 panels, they're all horizontal. Wow, all horizontal. Yes. And how wonderfully it works to convey this, how it is for them in the darkness, because they're in jail and they're in darkness, so it's only illuminated by the cigarette light, lighting the match. So right from the beginning, look at the cleverness, the innovation, I suppose, innovation to a point, the way they do it, exchanging cigarette, it adds it adds atmosphere. And then do we get some boring recap? No, we get a recap we can relate to. The story keeps changing. The central figure doesn't. It's Captain Britain. Okay, but the story keeps changing. Well, 2 Beatles. Oh, no. Then, like 5, 10, 50, 100. Just, you can relate to that. Because this is how stories go when they're told by different people, when the same story is told by different people. My friend said there were 2. No, there were 20. Well, I know somebody else who said there were 50. Just like you said, with those 2 panels where he's flanked by 2 Beatles, and then they keep the same pose. Alan Davis, the same pose, and now he's surrounded by like 50. Oh, okay, because the story has changed. And when you read stuff like this, you think, why can't every writer write like this? Why can't every writer artist produce this? Is it really that hard to be even mildly clever to introduce this storytelling technique? Most people would just be kind of hacking it out. And I just can't say enough good things about this. Way beyond nice, way beyond. So yeah, if I were an editor and I saw this, I'd say, get me that man on the phone immediately.
You know, it's fun. Well, and I agree with every word you said. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, because I can't keep offering up all these superlatives or whatever.
May I add something to this?
Okay, go ahead, Adam.
Just that I love the placement of actually understanding who Captain Britain is in this world, because I really enjoyed the run that we had up until this point, but I understood where he was with his fellow characters and those who knew him. But in terms of being a figure in this mythical world, of this fictional world, who was he as a superhero? Who was he as a character? He wasn't really that well established in what we had read. Here, we see the sort of iconic or mythological status he holds. We hear about these legends that are passed on between people, expressing these characters, while at the same time leaving him so opaque and so undefined. He really does become a type of emblem, literally, as he wears the Union Jack as the symbol of hope. And it's so interesting that the Union Jack, as I said in that last page of this issue, is also flying over this concentration camp. So you have this contrast between the Union Jack as a force of hope and an emblem of something to adhere to, and then an oppressive force. So there's a lot of subtext happening there as well, which I appreciate. And I just want to say, as one comparison, during my childhood, one of my favorite cartoons was the animated Batman TV show from the WB network. And there was an episode where 3 children are going through a warehouse telling stories that they heard about Batman. Yep. Each one is told with a different narrative style and with a different animation style. And this evoked that a lot for me. And it's certainly not the time, I shouldn't say the first time, that sort of conceit's ever been done in storytelling, especially in comics. But when it's done well, it's one of my favorite types of storytelling narratives. And this one is just, I think, an exemplary edition of it. It's fantastic.
And, you know, I probably came across that trope first in an issue of Spectacular Spider-Man or Web by Peter David. Because Peter David, I grew up loving Peter David, and I didn't realize till I got older, he cribbed a lot of these techniques from Alan Moore, which I'm fine with, because as Nice Man pointed out, is it so hard? These techniques are out there, and, you know, you don't just have to tell a superhero story the same way every issue. Like the fact that this is 2 characters we haven't seen, the fact that they're the twist of them being in a concentration camp, the fact that we're following the story along with Captain Britain for all these issues, and then we just jump to a completely different perspective is just a really unique way to tell the story. And like Nice Man said, I wish more people would just even think outside the box a little bit, right? But
well, the great cinema example in American cinema is Citizen Kane, 1941. Orson Welles and Mankiewicz, you know, great. Just keep telling your story, your perception of Kane and what he did. Maybe if we put it all together, we might actually find some truth. One other thing is that Alan Moore, no matter how dramatic, no matter how serious, because, you know, he was very focused in this period, 84, with, you know, increasing fascistic tendencies, like with V for Vendetta and other stuff. But he never loses his sense of humor. You know, if we were like hacks, some people might say, yes, we are. But if we were hacks and we were thinking about a comic story we were going to do, and all these kind of guards with, you know, some kind of armor or whatever, what name will we call them? We'll call them something, you know, just something mean sounding, something tough sounding. And what does he call them? The Beatles. It's just great.
Beatles. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the only other thing we talk about is the art, which, I mean, we talk about the art every time we review a story, but nice man, you already mentioned the opening scene with the two characters only being illuminated by the cigarette light.
This is Alan Davis's best art for me.
Yeah, he's getting better and better with every story. I agree. This is great.
I prefer it to his later stuff.
You know what's funny? I kind of agree. Explain why is that?
Because maybe with Alan Moore, they're being innovative. Maybe they're left to be a bit carefree, to do as they want to do, and maybe later on when he does stuff like Excalibur or whatever, he has to be a bit more conventional or something like that. I don't know exactly, but I just know that when I see the 9-panel horizontals, when I see that billboard with the fascist guy who apparently is always right, reminds me of somebody else, and it's just perfect. That page is perfectly done, from the flag billowing to the night sky with illuminated, by the floodlights, the mesh, the angle of the beetle in the foreground, and to the word balloon coming from one of the concentration camp huts. It's a perfect page.
The one thing I will say that I do think that on a technical level, Davis did get better with time, but there's something about this early art, even like this texture that he uses here. Wait, I don't know what this is, but I've seen it in UK comics before, and I love it. It might just be like a sort of pointillism technique, but I love it. And the solid colors coming through, which more modern readers tend to not like, but I like this. Just solid green, purple, blue. That's all I need, I love it. Anything else to say about the art, Adam?
No, you've touched upon it, and I think we can provide more superlatives as we go on about Alan Davis's art in this run, but it's uniformly fantastic. I talked about the maturation of Alan Moore as a writer, and we'll see that more as we go on, but I agree. Nice man, you're right. I think this is probably my favorite art I've seen from Davis.
Isn't it ironic that if we talk about American comic books, we all know about, the Barry Smith Conans, the Neil Adams X-Men, you can name a whole load of things. But among American comic book readers, who the hell knows about this?
Nobody.
Nobody.
And if you were to ask a typical reader of our age to list their 5 to 10 favorite American Marvel comics, no one would list this.
No, nobody knows about it. It's just another edition of the Mighty World of Marvel on British stands. And how much did Alan Moore and Alan Davis get paid for this? Probably not much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely underrated, but that's why we're here. UK Corral, folks. Okay, so let's jump to the next chapter. Adam, would you like to summarize this one quickly?
Yes, I will. So this one reintroduces one of our favorite characters. Before I get into it, it starts with a group of these beetles just kind of searching around this wasteland, and they're searching for a reading of some sort of disturbance they see. Let me say, when I say that Alan Moore has matured as a writer, it's also in terms of character dialogue, because you have these different voices and these sort of accents these characters are speaking in, whereas sometimes it could feel a little bit as a caricature in previous issues. Here, you just get this feeling that these just happen to be 3 lads who have gotten a job to put in this beetle armor. And the opening dialogue is just great. I think we go to reading, Tony. Just that little addition of the hesitation, that kind of clipped speech. Yes, I know it's a technique a lot of people use, but as it goes on with the dialogue, you hear nuances and differences in how these 3 characters speak, who, well, just spoil, will not be playing a major part throughout the rest of the story. That's amazing, and I think that's fantastic. But anyway, away from that declaration of my admiration, we are returned to that incredible robot that was assaulting Captain Britain and traveled through realities to find him. It's been convalescing in a cave after its last battle. The three Beetles try to throw some sort of grenade at it in order to destroy it, but of course they only end up incinerating themselves, and we have the android emerging from the ground, continuing his pursuit. And then the remainder of the comic pretty much entrenches what we've seen already with the state that the world is in. Captain Britain and his colleagues are hiding out in the house as they're trying to evade the capture by these Beetles and figure out a way to overturn the plans of Mad Jim Jaspers. At the same time, there's a lot of tension happening. The Captain Britain from the alternative dimension, the female Captain Britain, she's still obviously entrenched within PTSD. She cannot fathom trying to help. There is the extra dimensional figure who basically manipulated and exploited Captain Britain at the very beginning of this run. She's continuing to try to convince him that he should fight Jim Jaspers. Her name is Saturnine. Let me just restate that. And Saturnine is having a very poor job to try to convince him to make these battles happen. It just seems like it's a losing cause. But as it goes on, we see some other adversaries of Mad Jim Jaspers. They attempt to go into his home and commit assassination, and it doesn't work. He cannot be assassinated because he is a reality warping fiend, and he ends up doing these deplorable things to these people where he makes small versions of themselves grow out of their skin. He elongates their mass, and one of them, who is kind of a Margaret Thatcher stand-in, he transforms into a dog. And there's this horrific description where she describes feeling her bones move and crunch, and she wishes she could scream, but she can't. It's just incredible. And the issue ends with Captain Britain finally deciding that it's time to defend England. He suits up, and he's on his pursuit of Mad Jim Jaspers. And yeah, that is, I believe, the end of that particular issue.
And this particular pose, this little splash at the end, has been used somewhere, covers, reprints somewhere, but it's kind of a famous image of Captain Britain. But once again, I thought this was great. We're following along with these characters. What's the robot called? Is it the Fury?
Yes, the Fury.
And the way that he's reintroduced, it's like we get shivers every time we see this character, and here he is again in this cave, and that, like, this face, it's like, if you think about Scott McCloud's, right, when he talks about the human face with all you need is two dots and a smiley face, this is the opposite of that. There is nothing about this that is human, and I think that's why it's such a simple design. Our brains can't make it into anything. We don't know what it is, right? And it's just freaky. It's so simple, but it's brilliant. And then, okay, I want to talk about the art. I think there's one other thing about UK art that I noticed, right away when I was younger. And this is something Alan Moore said when I believe it was when Alan Moore came to the States. He gave a comment or a critique to the first American artist he worked with, and he said that he was used to art that had more black in it, more ink. And if you look at these panels, it's almost like, we've already talked about Batman Adventures, and I'm sure you know about the technique that was innovated on that cartoon called, I think it was called Dark Noir, where instead of starting with a blank cell, they would paint the cell black and then put the art on top of that. And if you look at these panels here, it's like there's so much black. And the thing I love about comic book art is when you have all this black, it makes all the colors pop out even more. And that's why I actually prefer the older style of color here. So anyway, I just wanted to say that about the art. Again, look at this black background, black, 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 black. And it's just brilliant. I think the art's great again in this issue. Yeah, nice, man. What do you think?
Three main things. The Fury, for me, believe it or not, really is one of the scariest characters in comics history. Just like you said, the design on the so-called face. Every time we see it, our heads want to make sense of it. Well, is that the mouth? Is it sideways? No, it's not human.
Mhm.
And it's wonderfully, wonderfully alien. And look how simple it is, you know?
Mhm.
And I wonder if Alan Moore said to Alan Davis, just make sure he's alien. An alien doesn't just mean writhing tentacles or something. It's just in this simple design. And I don't quite know how to say this, but I actually, for me, the Fury is easily one of the top 3 scariest characters I've ever encountered in comics, ever. And we just know, as soon as the Beatles come across him, we just know, holy shit, they're going to be absolutely fried or something. And we know it doesn't matter if they toss grenades, he's coming out. So it's a bit like, you know, when I was a kid reading the black and white reprints of Thor in Fantastic, the Destroyer. This Destroyer was very impressive to me because it was just a relentless kind of killing character. And I think the Fury's in that vein, perhaps more than the Destroyer, because he travels through dimensions and so on. So that's great. Number 2 is, on this page that you have displayed right now, I will quiz you and say which American artist is being copied here regarding the sound effect. You could say, well, this artist, that artist, another artist. But who do we most relate this to?
Well, I think you know the answer, so you might as well tell us, because I don't have one. Do you, Adam?
Nope, go ahead.
I'm so disappointed. But that's not very nice. And I said I'd do that. Marshall Rogers. That's exactly kind of what he would do in Detective and in Doctor Strange. Yeah. And the third thing is it possible that only Alan Moore can take a Jim Jaspers cartoon character and make him terrifying? It's terrifying in his own way as the Joker or the Fury or the Destroyer.
Right.
Because do you know the old British comedian Terry Thomas?
No.
I do.
He was he in Bedknobs and Broomsticks?
I believe so.
He's gap-toothed and alliterative, Terry Thomas. So I believe Alan Moore based Jim Jaspers on Terry Thomas. Gap-toothed, alliterative Jim Jaspers.
Wow. Okay, I'm looking him up right now.
And I think it's perfect because you don't need a muscle-bound villain. They don't all have to be muscle-bound. They can just be characters. That's why we love the Joker so much. He's scrawny. He's not muscle-bound, but he's insane. And Jim Jaspers here is a worthy British version of the Joker, but he's not the Joker. He's Jim Jaspers. Great name. Absolutely great name. Jim Jaspers. Sounds like an upper-class twit. But he's a homicidal maniac.
Not that those are mutually exclusive, of course, but still. I want to give some thoughts on the villains since you brought this up, because I think they're really interesting, and we're going to see near the end of this run what happens is that we have this polemic between these villains where Mad Jim Jaspers is literally mad, but he has the power to do anything. He can warp reality and make anything happen to his will, and that ability to bend everything to his whim is what makes him so intimidating, paired with the instability of his psyche. It sounds like certain politicians who are in power right now. But with that said, that's one end, I think, of what Moore might be depicting in that concern of this growing fascist tide that, as you said, he was very sensitive about at this time in his writing. The other element is the Fury, which is calculative, which is an uncanny valley where it resembles a human in some aspects. It has 4 limbs, it's bipedal sometimes, it has what you could see as optic openings for eyes, but it's this sort of, I guess you could say, approximation of a human form. It's still something wrong, and I think the fact that it's fringing very close to looking human but not being quite there is what makes its appearance so disturbing. but its motivation is based upon protocol only. It has a mission to eliminate all these superpowered beings within its world. That was its original mission. It's continuing to do that to eliminate Captain Britain. And the fact that it has no other drive or motivation but to complete its task also sounds just like those who may be under the sway of political demagogues end up doing anything that is ordered to them. And I think they represent these two, I guess you could say, prongs of the fear of fascism or fascist-like rule. And as the story goes on, we're really going to see how that culminates and why they become such formidable and scary adversaries for Captain Britain and this world. But I'm glad that Nice Man brought that up, because that's a point that I think we should keep in mind. I don't think it's accidental. I think there's something very purposeful for how these two villains are projected.
It's a great point. Well, we can jump to the next chapter because we have a lot more to talk about. But is there anything else anyone want to say about this one?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay, so Nice Man, would you like to take over and tell us what happens in the next one quickly?
Well, I've said such good things about it so far. I'll be disappointed in myself if I don't remember. But
Okay.
I can see, you see, the thing about this is that with the Captain Britain stuff, everything we've described so far is entertaining enough in its own right. But it's Alan Moore, so we have layer on top of layer, but not confusing. Because here we are with Merlin and his daughter. And even visually, they're very interesting. Merlin with the long white hair, the daughter with the lush black hair. And it's a strange relationship, really, but, you know, very distinctive, not just some boring Merlin in a pointy hat with a costume with stars or something. This is a different kind of Merlin. And we're reminded that Merlin is the chess player, ultimately in control of Captain Britain, we think, because he helped create, or he created Captain Britain. And so, of course, we've got the classic characters represented as pieces on a chessboard. And what's he going to do? The daughter tells him basically to abandon the game. So all that previous stuff is very serious with touches of humor. And now we're told it's a game. Really, it's just a game. She's telling him, abandon the game. So they're chess pieces. They're not real. It's a game. It's a game being played by Merlin and his daughter. But Merlin doesn't want to abandon the game, and that causes friction between him and his daughter. So we go back into the story. Doesn't this bit here kind of remind you a bit like Jason and the Argonauts, with the gods looking down?
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, speaking to Jason occasionally, and you know, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are, back in the thick of it, and the Beatles. Oh, that's right. The Beatles are invading their lair where they're hidden.
Right.
This guy Tom, I forget him. I remember him, but I forget him.
He's the brother of, I think, the other psychic who is Captain Britain's girlfriend, paramour. I'm not quite sure.
Right, because he communicates telepathically, doesn't he, with them?
Yeah.
And so anyway, he sacrifices himself to slow the Beatles while the others try to get away. So he sacrifices himself, but he's not able to prevent others being killed too, or at least struck down. Do you really think this is a kind of Margaret Thatcher kind of stand-in, this character with the purple hair?
Not her. No, there was another one earlier.
Oh, another one, not her. Okay.
Yeah. No, that was the one that was transformed into the dog, who we will be seeing.
Oh, yes, transformed into the dog. Yes, I'm sorry. Anyway, so Tom sacrifices his life. Other characters get struck down, and Saturnine escapes with the female Captain Britain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, you know, the flashbacks show us again Merlin determined now to move Captain Britain into place because, as his daughter says, there are 3 pieces left and it's your move. And he moves Captain Britain. Now Captain Britain enters the fray and tries to take on, he's trying to take on, to get to Jim Jaspers, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's trying to go right to the source of the problems, the absolute insanity in an insane world of Jim Jaspers. And there he ascends I love the staircase. It's kind of on fire. Mm-hmm. It's like ascending the steps to hell, except it's the other going up instead of down. Mm-hmm. And there he is. Meanwhile, Saturnine is trying very hard to get the female Captain Britain to grow a pair, even though she's female. Mm-hmm. And of course she does it in the one little bit of a cliched way. But then again, this issue is over 40 years ago. So when I say a little bit cliched, maybe that's a bit unfair. Goads her until she strikes Saturnine in the face, bruising her badly, which makes Saturnine happy because now we know that the female Captain Britain will, come into the action. And finally here on this page, I love it. The sign on the door shows it's Jim Jaspers with a little note saying "knock and wait." Mm-hmm. See, Alan Moore, Alan Davis together, they never overlook or miss an opportunity, even for a little touch, which says, it says to us, we're really having fun with this.
Right.
And even though he's about to go through that door to face the absolute insane reality-bending presence of Jim Jaspers, we're still going to stick a little note on the door saying knock and wait. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he's in, and I love the dialogue. Can I help you, sir? You appear to be lost. Of course he's lost. As Jasper says, lost in the funhouse. Jasper's here is almost like ascended to godlike status because it's his reality and it's warped in a very Jim Starlin, Steve Ditko kind of way.
Yes, that's exactly. I see a lot of Jim Starlin in this issue. And I love how even the frame of the door is melting away here.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. Yeah. It's brilliant.
Even then, again, little touches. When you leave people free to be creative instead of worrying all the time about controlling everything they do, they can come up with great stuff. Mm-hmm. And this is what they've done.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Yeah. This was another great chapter. Again, we're kind of shifting perspectives around again. Now we're going to the point of view of Merlin and his daughter, right? Yeah. And that's one of the things, I don't know if we've even talked about that much when we've reviewed these issues, but that's one of the brilliant things about this series is, again, we're only getting whatever it is, 5 to 10 pages here, but we're jumping around so much. We're I don't know. I kind of run out of, things to say about this because it's so brilliant, but I just love it.
Mike, go back to the previous page.
This one?
And one before.
Okay.
I hope you've noticed this, but one thing Alan Davis did was that for the majority of the issue, when we're seeing the narrative, we have these perfectly squared, right-angled panels. But once we enter into the realm of Jim Jaspers, notice how stuff starts to go akimbo. We're seeing severe angles. Once he's fully entrenched within the house, which is the next page, what you see is all of these slanted panels bleeding into each other. It's disorienting, which is a great visual cue to show just how maddening this environment must be. I really appreciate that. That is a great artistic touch. I will say of all the issues we've read, and this is nitpicky, this is probably the least satisfying, mainly because I feel this is one of those issues that will get us from point A to point B. There's not a lot of development. In fact, it was touched upon that scene between the female Captain Britain and Saturnine, and it seems like there was kind of a lack of attempt to develop the female Captain Britain's character. It was kind of a situation where, we need her to be active now. Here we are. Here's this trope. And now she's ready to fight. That was a little bit disappointing, I guess. But to be fair, it wasn't even anything I really thought of too much during my enjoyment of this. I will say, even though I will argue this is the story, or the run at least, that we see the maturation of Alan Moore, it's really Alan Davis for this issue. His art and the creative licenses that he takes from me is what makes this so enjoyable.
Can we say if we, well, I can't say if we were writing it, if we were editing it, if we said to Alan Moore in 1984, Alan Moore and Alan Davis, everything is great, but we don't want to use the bit where Saturnine has to goad the female Captain Britain until the female Captain Britain lashes out at her and bruises Saturnine's face so badly that Saturnine now knows, okay, the fight in hers has now risen in the female Captain Britain. Now she'll be able to go on and to do what she has to do. And we don't want to use it like that because of the cliches inherent in it. Can we come up with another way to get female Captain Britain to snap out of it without it having to be Saturnine goading her? Is there any other way we can get her to snap out of it?
I would say it would just be convince her through logic, right? But I can't say what that logic would be, but that would be more clever than just punching her in the face, right?
I would say self-realization. Unlike the previous reality in which Mad Jim Jaspers had these concentration camps, eliminated all the superpowered beings, and started this fascist rule, she lost any sense of agency or control there. A small act, an accidental thing where she suddenly was able to do something to maybe help somebody, maybe would spark in her a realization of, I do have autonomy. I do have the ability to make change without, being goaded into some sort of, cliched like fight or punch up. I don't think these are necessarily the best ideas, but I do think there are ways that we could work around this. And certainly, I don't have the mind of Alan Moore. So I don't think this is because he's limited in imagination. It's probably limitation of space and time provided for the narrative. And that's why I think this felt a little rushed with this interaction. I'll put it that way.
Sure. But yeah, overall, I still respect that he's compressing so much story into so few pages. And it actually, it's interesting because it forces him to condense things, but it also allows him to experiment a little bit, because no matter how weird this chapter may be, there's always going to be another one a week later. You know what I mean? So I think that gives him a little bit more leeway to experiment with things. That's at least the way I feel.
Well, actually, if I may, Mike, if we're done talking about this issue, I could maybe posit another answer for Nice Man if you let me do the synopsis for the next edition.
Oh, absolutely. Because I'm Nice Man, so that's the nice thing.
You're especially nice today.
So you want to do this one, Adam? Sure, go ahead.
I'm very nice, man.
I would say we just could omit that entire page from the previous issue, because here is all we need. We have Saturnine basically showing the female Captain Britain what's happening in the world and essentially guilting her into disrobing from her civilian garb, adopting on her costume and putting on the helmet. She still looks distraught. She still looks as if she's uncertain that she wants to do this, but she's being compelled to. And I think maybe even that sequence in the previous issue was superfluous. We didn't need it. But regardless, we have it as it is. And that opening sequence shows she is suited up. She's kitted up and ready to go. At the same time, we see Mad Jim Jaspers not only wrecking reality warping havoc across the entirety of the country, but of course, another little bit of a chestnut, a little bit of a cliche naming this issue Anarchy in the UK. How many times has a story been set in the UK with disarray titled Anarchy in the UK? Regardless.
I mean, by 1984, maybe none.
That could be in 83 or 84. It could have been none.
Potentially. Anyway, with that small grievance aside, this is where it really picks up, because what I love is showing the power that Jaspers has. His reality warping powers is trying to play games with Captain Britain, where all these people who were eliminated, killed, or abandoned suddenly appear back in life. And They are telling him, no, you were under this delusion that you were in this other reality, that you were being pursued by this robot, the Fury, that you were with some strange, like, cabal of aliens. No, we're still fighting Jim Jaspers in this reality. And there's this great sequence where on the next page, Captain Britain understands, no, that can't be true. And he tears literally like a page away, revealing the fictitiousness of it. And it reminds me of a lot of what happened in Animal Man, actually.
Yes.
With
yes.
Grant Morrison's run on it, that sort of third wall breaking and that meta evaluation of this being a comic. It doesn't quite go as deep here, but you get that implication. And another example of great art, 2 panels down, you go from Captain Britain ripping out the page to underneath him in a civilian garb as Brian tearing apart a sheet. And this is another, spoiler, delusion of Jasper's, where they're trying to tell him that he's actually just a patient who's been delusional all this time, that he's actually been having these fantasies, and he's not really Captain Britain. Again, he doesn't believe that, so the doctor administers a sedative, and he awakens to still be within the grasp of Mad Jim Jaspers, who throws him around, completely decimating him. No matter what Captain Britain does, his meaty punches or his spears and attacks, these are just futile physical efforts for this man who can bend everything to his will. There's this great sequence of panels where he depicts himself as a grim reaper, a devil, a salacious schoolmaster about to whip a young schoolboy, and then even as some sort of lawn maintenance person cutting up Captain Britain within this giant weed whacker or lawnmower. It's very vicious stuff. And we just see the futility of Captain Britain's pure attempts at physicality against a force of not only nature, but of pure reality in and of itself, only reality gone mad. And just when we think things could be at their worst, the final panel on this issue ends with what we know is the point of view of the Fury, who has finally located Captain Britain. A great issue demonstrating the power of Mad Jim Jaspers, demonstrating some creative use of sequential art, and just some very clever storytelling from Moore. If the last issue felt like one of the weakest in this run, which was still a good issue, this is one of my favorites in this run.
Agree.
Yeah, look at the design of that page.
Right.
You know, in a previous page or two, I think I counted like 11 panels or something.
Or this one, maybe?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Yeah, if you count that
12,
one, yeah.
12.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, you're right, yes.
And then, you know, further on, we only have like 4, but it's perfect. That pose of the beaten Captain Britain feels like he's going to fall out of the page.
Which one?
Page.
Oh, this one? That's a great point.
He's going to slide all the way out of the page.
It's a great point.
And he's at, again, a lowest ebb. And Jaspers is like a cartoon character, but he's really compelling, convincing, and everything. And then we have the point of view of the Fury. And as you know, I mean, okay, you're just about destroyed, and now the Fury's almost on the scene. So, and yet, at the same time, all this is being manipulated, is it, by Merlin and his daughter? They're playing a chess game. So, you know, reality within reality.
I want to point out, I really enjoy, where is it? Okay. I like the fact that, you know, there's this old saying, like a perfect movie needs no dialogue, right? And you could say the same thing about a comic book. Now, looking at this panel, it's very obvious what's going on. However, only Alan Moore would think to add this little detail. There was an argument about the jeans. She cried and wanted to keep them on. I love it. I just love the fact that he adds that little detail of characterization to her that we didn't need, but it's just a nice little touch. And there's little things like that throughout the whole series, right?
And of course, this is a perfect example of Alan Moore. What word shall we use? Alan Moore trumpeting the absence of thought balloons.
Yes, right.
And you could say, yeah, we really don't need them here. But he's such a good writer that he doesn't need them, or he puts them in narrative boxes. Like you just said, there was an argument about the jeans. She cried and wanted to keep them on. Okay, we don't need a thought balloon of her saying, I want to keep my jeans on. I like thought balloons. I like the dramatic irony of thought balloons. I don't like thought balloons for exposition.
Right.
I like it for dramatic irony. And I've always felt that Alan Moore was wrong to completely avoid thought balloons. But I think what he would say is they're not completely obliterated. They're just substituted, by narrative captions.
Agree. Any thoughts on that, Adamantium?
No, I concur with that. I think that's a great observation. In the end, this is the last of this particular collected edition, and we're moving on to the second. But the stakes have raised. There is great creative sequencing throughout this. And I do love narratives where we have that hint of maybe the perception of the main character is not quite reality. And when you have a reality warping being like Mad Jim Jaspers as your adversary, it just makes it so much more compelling. With that said, though, we still have a lot more to get through, so we should probably move on, I would imagine, to the next issue.
Yeah, so this is now in X-Men Archives, featuring Captain Britain #7, which is reprinting Mighty World of Marvel number 11, 12, and 13. And this is the final phase of Captain Britain. And if you want, I can do this issue because... Okay, so we open up, and I just read this today, and I already forget how this opens, but we open up, so now, picking up where we left off last issue, now Captain Britain is fighting the Fury. This is essentially going to be the final battle between Captain Britain and his adversary that he's had for the entire Alan Moore run, right? Meanwhile, while this is going on, we're cutting back to, what's his name, Jasper?
Jim Jaspers.
Jim Jasper, who is warping reality and creating things as we go. And he actually says to these characters, "Hello, I'm Jim Jaspers. I made you." And that's kind of like another scene that's going on while the fight is happening. But there's this great sequence where he's in the foreground talking to these characters. And in the background, we see the Fury fighting Captain Britain. And then he said, there's a great sequence where he says how he made everything. I made everything, actually. I made this, I made that. Well, actually, I don't remember making that. He looks over at the Fury. I say. And so then the Fury comes, and we get this brilliant confrontation between the Fury and Jim Jaspers. And as we said earlier, two completely different types of villains. One is physically threatening, and one is more of a mad kind of intellectual, like the Joker or something. And what we see is... the Fury is it's almost like the Terminator, where he's calculating in his brain, and he knows that he has an order to not kill Jim Jaspers because Jim Jaspers is his creator. But then he reasons, but this is actually a different Jim Jaspers from a different dimension. And
Right.
after all this buildup of both of these characters, we get a 3-panel sequence where right here Jim Jaspers is talking. Well, hello, what's this he's doing? Shake hands? You want to shake hands? Great white god from over water? Then there's one explosion, and then we see Jim Jaspers reduced to a skeleton. It's, as you said, nice man. Alan Moore is keeping a sense of humor. It's brilliant, right?
And look at the art. Isn't it great?
It's great, again, because he's only inking the shadow of the skeleton and the shadows on the Fury, and everything else is illuminated by this explosion or this big source of light coming out from his kind of gun arm or whatever you want to call it. And then before our eyes, we see Jim Jaspers regrow his body, and then the Fury compensates by changing his shape. And so now we get this very bizarre fight between these two characters that are able to not only change their shape, but they're able to hop around into different dimensions. And I don't remember, that's going to come in the next issue, which we could talk. We're not going to jump ahead, but things are about to get even weirder. In the meantime, Captain Britain and Saturnine are kind of just watching from afar. Then we cut back to this is Merlin and his daughter kind of watching this happen. She's kind of getting fed up with what's happening, so she grabs Merlin and says, "Is this the end, Father? You've lost, haven't you? We've all lost. Answer me." Then he turns her over, or she turns him over, and he appears to be dead or comatose or something. We don't know yet. And so it's a brilliant chapter. Not much happens, but what does happen is very creatively handled. We mentioned Jim Starlin earlier and Steve Ditko, and once again, I see a little bit of that in here. So I thought it was a brilliant chapter. Adamantium, what do you think?
Yes, I love the creativity of showing how you have two things that can manipulate and augment themselves upon will, battling one another. We'll see that more in the next issue, but something I touched upon and I want to address now are these kind of different poles, these different prongs of what I think would be fascist or fascist-like rule that I talked about. The cold, calculating foot soldier that only follows directives, which is the Fury, and the power-mad, unstable dictator who only cares about his whim being followed. And his whim is order and meaningless. It's just what he wants. So what happens when you have a thing that cannot follow the directive of the power-mad leader, and the power-mad leader cannot control the drone, the sentry that it assumes it has control over? You know, there's a lot of parallels, I think, and warnings to what happens for those who might be swayed to fall into this sort of political ideology that you can have power, absolute power, and you can control things. All you need is the perfect soldier. But the idea is the soldier will only follow directives so far as it needs to follow. And sometimes if it perceives you infringe upon those directives, you yourself will be culpable of being a target.
Yep.
What's happening here is that great example, that logical loophole that you talked about, Mike, where the Fury goes, well, I'm programmed not to kill Jim Jaspers, even though I always felt really upset at him. And yet you're not really Jim Jaspers. You're Jim Jaspers from another universe, so I can do this. And I think this is very prescient for a lot of things that we might be seeing within real world political spheres right now. And a kind of warning about how the guns curated for those in power sometimes fall back and aim back at those who loaded them. So I love that. I don't think it's accidental or coincidental that that sort of reading could be made in this. Again, given the sensitivity that was mentioned that Alan Moore had about the rising tide of fascism and the extreme right at the time of writing this, and he focused upon his writing in the mid-'80s and early '90s. But beyond that, also creative art, incredible dialogue, mixture of horror, pathos, comedy, and what if a Looney Tunes cartoon came to life and would be the most horrifying thing you would ever see? This is an example of it.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Great point. Anything else to add to that, Nice Man?
I just wish I could go into a comic book store these days, flip through a comic book, you know, because I always flip through them and I don't buy them.
Okay.
But if I flip through this, I wouldn't hesitate. Absolutely wouldn't hesitate. Just great characterization, like you said. What a bizarre battle, you know, tremendous. These two characters, they're so completely different, and now they're engaging in a Looney Tunes battle, but you know it's serious. And the dialogue, like you said, you know, where he's got the dialogue of Terry Thomas. And like I said, the gap-toothed British comedian. Mm-hmm. This is Terry Thomas dialogue, you know, where he says, you know, things like, foreigners, I ask you, and I say, you know, like.
And then the whole bit with the shaking hands is it's like Looney Tunes, like you said. It's hilarious. It's almost like Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny, right? With the or Elmer Fudd with the shotgun,
You see
getting his
how,
beak blown off.
yeah, and you see how this page is laid out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the placement of the balloons and the narrative boxes, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'm blind. I don't recall current day comic books looking like this or
Well,
reading like this.
let's not. I don't want to condemn all current comics because I love Tom King. I love Greg Smallwood. There's some art. There's definitely some writers that I really enjoy now, but I do know what you mean. And I will say the other interesting thing about this is that because I read Miracle Man, V for Vendetta when I was an early teen. This is interesting for me because I'm reading this, like you said, 40 years after it came out, but
Yeah.
it's still just as brilliant as the day it was published, in my opinion. So the sheen has not worn off. Like the novelty of how good it is still there. It's amazing.
Yeah, this is how you, for me, this is how you do a comic book.
Mm-hmm.
Characters, writing, layout, art, colors, everything, everything. I mean, I just wouldn't hesitate, even if it was $7, which some comic books are.
Yeah.
I wouldn't hesitate.
Sorry, nice man. I just wanted to bring up one quick thing too, because Mike made a comment about the Terminator as a reference point.
Yeah.
So what I think is interesting is that this entire run, including what came before this that we had already read, was written in 83 and 84. The Terminator film came out in October of 1984.
Interesting.
So this entire story concept predated it by at least a year. And of course, this was not the only type of story where you had a Star Wars soldier who was pursuing someone else endlessly. There was an Outer Limits episode that kind of preceded that even back in 1964. But I do think it's interesting that I think a lot of people getting into this may go, oh, it's slightly derivative of Terminator, but it actually precedes that.
Interesting point. I didn't even think about that. Okay, let's jump. We got a few more chapters to go. I think, Nice Man, I think it's your turn to summarize.
I don't think I can.
Okay. 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 Well, that being said, Adam, would you like to summarize this one?
Sure, I will.
Okay.
Basically, we're getting the battle of reality warping versus an unstoppable force. We see Jim Jaspers basically bending the world to his will and changing form when fighting the Fury. Every onlooker, whether it's the beings that Jim Jaspers created or if it's Captain Britain and Saturnine, can just look on in marvel and horror at what's happening. There's the big splash page that looks like something out of like a medieval relief because of the way it's illustrated, almost something like you'd see from like, I don't know, like Italian the Jabberwocky, for example, which I think is very apropos. Again, I think I mixed up my references because the Jabberwocky is definitely not medieval, but that sort of ilk of this mythical giant beast that is attacking another giant mythical beast. And as we go on, we see, as was alluded to, not only do these entities not only change form, becoming vaporous, becoming solid, liquid, fire, gaseous, but they also transcend and warp into different realities. And we have this incredible prose happening. I don't want to state it because it's really not worthwhile. It's worth reading on your own. But we just have this great motif that's occurring where as one reality or one form changes to the other, there's a single word prefacing it, switch. And you have that almost like hearing a click in a film as something snaps and the world around you changes. And it warps from the kind of gaseous world of inside of a sun to what appears to be some sort of Cthulhu-like flesh and blood entity. It is incredible, the environments that they battle within. And what I really appreciate about this is the cleverness of the Fury. It realizes, well, this thing can warp reality and change reality to its will, but what if we go to a place where there is no reality? because it traversed different realities in order to get to this one. There was a sort of interzone, a state of non-existence that it had to pass through. So it takes them there, where Jim Jaspers, where Jim Jaspers has no control. He has no quarter over this realm because he has, as the narration says, no clay to play with. So at this point, the Fury is able to basically fry Jim Jasper's brains, and he is dead. And that is the finale of that character. It's then shown how the Fury is taking a toll in this battle. He comes back to reality with the cadaver of Jim Jaspers, but he is basically kneeled over. He can barely stand. These entities that Jaspers created, they try to assault the Fury, but it's to no avail. Even in his weakened state, he just fends them off with this sort of electrical impulse, and they all run away. But what we have then is Captain Britain pulling the Fury aside, and he's about to do battle with him in his weakened form. So he punches and attacks and claws out its face, ripping off its arm. It's actually quite brutal to see this imagery. Although even in this extremely weakened state, the Fury is not down. It shoots out a dart through Captain Britain's shoulder. It continues pummeling him, all the while Saturnine and the female Captain Britain are looking on. It is looking really dire. The Fury even is about to blast it with a sort of optic laser that killed Captain Britain in a previous issue. Watch our previous episode to understand what that means. But then you see these tears stream down her face, this gritting look of anger on her face, and she flies into action where she destroys the Fury, decimating it, tearing it apart. You can see wires, even spinal columns being torn out. Again, a reference to these sort of different organic and mechanical parts that augmented into itself in previous issues to develop and progress into this new super being. And one thing to remember, and it's been so long we may forget, not only was the Fury responsible for helping to destroy the universe that this Captain Britain inhabited, it was also responsible for killing her loved ones, her lover, and her family. And so what we have, not only my cat yelling at me, but we have this scene where she is done eviscerating this robot. Captain Britain goes behind her and goes, "He's dead. He's been dead for 10 minutes. And it's chilling and honestly very sad. You really see the PTSD and the trauma this character went through in the sequence in such an emotionally effective way that most comics, even by today's standards, don't manage to achieve. It is very harrowing. And then we essentially have a little bit of a denouement after this, where Captain Britain is consoling her. We see Saturnine take the DNA sample by scratching the face of Jim Jaspers, puts it in the vial and walks away. And then on the next page, we essentially have the finale of the story arc before we get to the epilogue. Everyone is transported back to this reality where Merlin and his daughter were manipulating things, and they see Merlin, it is true, he is dead.
Right. And then do you want to just jump to the next chapter? I can just jump right now.
You want me to just summarize that and just so we can...
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yep.
Sure, I'll do it. I talk so much anyway. It's an epilogue. So what we do see is all these characters coming together for the funeral of Merlin. There's a lot of talking and a lot of dialogue exchange. Wrapping up, there's some neat points to go on where beyond some of the gorgeous art that we see, there's a great opportunity for Davis to illustrate these variant Captain Britons from across different universes. They have exchanges. Captain Britain is introduced to all these other variants, including one very awkward one, where I guess it's from an alternative reality where the Third Reich may have won the Second World War.
Yes,
and it's
funny.
I forget what it was, Commander Breton or something like that, and it has a swastika on its chest, and you can see one of the other Captain Britons is trying to pull him aside and go, "Well, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
Commandant Englander. So anyway, as a little visual joke, that happens, and Captain Britain is pulled aside by Merlin's daughter, where they have a bit of a discussion and a digression about what has occurred. And what we get is kind of an anticlimax where there's no real meaning to this game that happened. She doesn't reveal any greater purpose, but all she really says is now that their realities are theirs, they can continue on and they will bring him home. His world may be bruised from the pursuits of Jim Jaspers and his attempts to control reality, but it can heal. And the comic ends with this odd sort of reconciliation between the two Captain Britons. Oh, I'm missing a part. Saturnine basically is with some other extra dimensional beings, wanting to exploit them by threatening to release a clone of Jim Jaspers to this world. And there's this very salacious scene where she makes this, I believe his name is Moondragon, who is another emperor, basically lick her boot as a sign of subservience to her, lest she unleashes this clone of Jim Jaspers back onto his world. Then we get the true climax, or not the climax, the final denouement of the story. We have the two Captain Britons embrace in a quick kiss, and then they depart. Captain Britain is going to continue defending the UK, whereas the female Captain Britain will basically try to find herself and discover where she can go from here. And it wraps up Alan Moore's run on Captain Britain, basically tying up every story thread that you would want to have tied up and making a relatively tight run where basically every point is reconciled. You have great character development, and you have stellar art by Alan Davis.
Yeah, and just to talk about these last few chapters, I think it's a very satisfying conclusion. A great final battle between Captain Britain and the Fury. One thing that I did think was interesting was that in the end, it was actually the other Captain Britain that kind of saved the day, not our Captain Britain. Right? Just something I took note of. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, anyone?
About the fact that she saved the day?
Well, yeah, it makes her the protagonist of the story.
Yeah, I think it's all right. I don't think we have to keep following convention all the time. And
right,
she certainly built up that this was coming because of all the pent-up rage and the PTSD. So it's more satisfying this way, I think.
Right. It's definitely unexpected. Yeah, you're right, and you're right. It's not following the typical conventions of the time, especially. So yeah, I thought it was great. I'm not sure, like the little, because Adam, you mentioned the kind of epilogue with Saturnine. I'm not sure if we needed that, but it was interesting to just show that these characters, like they make it clear Fury's going to go on, she's going to go on, right? Like this is not the last Captain Britain story. So Alan Moore knew that there was going to be other stories with these characters, and he's probably just setting them up for the next thing. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I think so as well. Basically, Saturnine was a character who wasn't as much a character. If there's a nitpick I can make, she seemed a little bit superfluous. She had certain plot points. She enabled certain plot points. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And without her, it would be harder to get from a point A to a point B, although I think with someone as creative as Alan Moore behind the pen, he probably could have figured it out. I think it was more just utilizing a character that had existed in the previous iteration of the arc. And I will say it was, yeah, you could argue unnecessary, but at least it gave a good little laugh and a little bit of a saucy joke for her final appearance in this run. Mm-hmm. I do also appreciate the comeuppance that Moondragon received. I believe that's the character's name. The only other thing of note I do want to talk about is the fact that, as you mentioned, it is the female Captain Britain who ultimately destroys the Fury. Yes, it is not conventional. It's not what you would see. It is technically a title character triumphing in the end, but not the title character we were expecting. And I know Alan Moore, despite some accusations of misogyny in his writing, I don't really view it as such. I think there's a lot of pathos. And I think there's a lot of suffering in his writing distributed amongst people of all types of genders, even fictitious genders that he creates for some of his more fantastical stories. Mm-hmm. But with that said, I just think this is a great example of him saying, no, this female character who is basically portrayed as being kind of weak and browbeaten and somewhat incapable, is the one that finally dispenses of the ultimate adversary. And I think there's a strength in that. And I think it gives her some sort of legitimacy for any writer who wants to go forward and utilize this character. There's a lot to go on. She's an expat from a now deceased dimension. She still will have the baggage of that loss of that reality and that world that she knew, but she has a strength and she has a conviction now, and it makes her a very interesting character to pursue hereafter. In fact, I would even argue she would be more interesting to follow going forward than the male Captain Britain, the original character, because his story arc is wrapped up. We're done. Merlin's thing is complete, just as Merlin is obviously a stand-in for Alan Moore. The death of Merlin coincides with the end of Alan Moore's run, so there's not a coincidence there as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting.
I really appreciate that. I see it as a sort of meta commentary on his finishing with this narrative and leaving the audience with this contained story. It's something where, if you know the history of Captain Britain, I'm sure it will inform a reading, but other than that, it's a great, complete story arc. I don't think there's anything that would surpass this in the rest of Captain Britain's writing and legacy. And unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure this is the benchmark of top tier Captain Britain stories to have been written.
Well, I'm absolutely not going to argue with that. And I've read some of the early issues and they're fun, but they're nothing close to this. And so we've talked about where this ranks in Captain Britain stories, where it ranks in Marvel stories. Where do we think this ranks among Alan Moore's other work? Because it is proto Alan Moore, it's early Alan Moore, but it doesn't get any attention. And I mean, we're all fans of V for Vendetta, Miracle Man, Watchmen. And I think that if there's one tiny thing that's holding this back, it's that it's a little bit awkward to reprint because Alan Moore's run does kind of start in the middle of a story. Which makes it difficult. It's one of those where if you're going to recommend it, you got to give people a preamble, right? Like even us, technically, this X-Men Archive series starts with a non-Alan Moore issue. So that's really the only way to reprint it.
That is true. I do want to say what I find very interesting is that from what I understand, Miracle Man, as written as Marvel Man, was actually first penned by Alan Moore in '82. So technically that precedes this a little bit.
Yeah.
So what I find so interesting is that I think I love Miracle Man, but I do see a progression in the writing as it advances. I think the early stories are very rough. They have a lot of great ideas in them and a lot of great dialogue, but it's as the story progresses that I think you really see the maturation of Moore as a writer, and it coincides with his run here. The only thing I want to say is in terms of ranking it, it doesn't quite have the creativity of Miracle Man, because I think a lot of those ideas you see transposed onto this, such as having these extra dimensional beings manipulate and control these heroes.
Right,
the sort
the
of death
Warpsmiths.
reconstitution of Captain Britain is very similar to what happened in Miracle Man. My cat has a lot of opinions as well. But I think we'll get greater and more subtle political nuance in his writings and stuff like V for Vendetta, even Watchmen, definitely in From Hell. We'll see later on. But I think this is a great jumping off point to say, if you liked V for Vendetta, if you liked Miracle Man, and you want some Alan Moore that is more adjacent to that, this would be it. But I would never recommend reading this preceding either one of those comics.
Right. I'll agree with that. Nice, man. What do you think? Any comments? Where does this rank?
No, I mean, is there anything Alan Moore we've said this before? Is there anything Alan Moore has written that is no good?
No.
So,
because I've read virtually everything.
Yes, there's quite a bit, actually, I would argue.
There is what?
I would argue a lot of his later era writing is not only low par, I think some of it's outright bad.
Like what?
I'll have to look it up, You know what? Share a point. I'm going to do a little research. I'll be right back.
And you don't have to do that today because we'll be doing a lot more Alan Moore comics. I will just say that in the latter day years after ABC Comics, I've definitely been less interested in what he's done, like the stuff he did for Avatar. He did a run on what's it called, the Crossed. I think it was called Cross Plus 100. But here's the thing: is it's not as good as his early work. But compared to everyone else, even though it's very hard to digest and sometimes very hard to understand, I still think he may not be in his prime, but he's still like a master who's maybe lost some of his spark, but he's still working on another level than almost everyone else.
I want to agree with that. I've read Necronomicon. That was the one I'm thinking of. I thought that was deplorable. I thought it was like reading a Mark Millar comic. I put it at that level. As you said, there was some things that he wrote even for Image. He wrote a little bit of Youngblood, which was also...
It was excellent.
I thought it was excellent. The best Youngblood comic I ever read, but still not great, in my opinion.
Sure.
And I think also when he got into his erotica phase as well, I did not care for that. I also didn't care much for Promethea, to be honest.
Ooh. We'll get to that in another episode, but I will say one more thing about Alan Moore around that era is, sorry, you were just listening. Oh, you mentioned Necronomicon. He also did, I'm not sure if it was tied to that, but it was an H.P. Lovecraft tie-in, and that was really well done, but I don't remember what it was called because I don't have a way to access the internet right now because we're recording my screen.
Because Necronomicon, I think, was an H.P. Lovecraft story, so that might actually be something that you're thinking of.
Yeah, I think it might have been like a sequel or to that, but I do remember liking the second or third one a lot better than Necronomicon. But we don't, yeah. But I mean, hey, we've got so many more episodes to go of Alan Moore and so many more episodes to go of all these other creators. So, hey, this has been fun. We've talked about, there's only, I don't know how many chapters there were by Alan Moore, maybe maybe 24, which equals only about 12 full-size American comics, right? So almost around the same amount of stories he did for Miracle Man. But this is a great run. Everyone should pick this up. Absolutely. You can find these X-Men archives in quarter bins, right, at comic conventions everywhere. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, and I just want to put this out there because I know we'll get flamed in the comments for me disgracing the godhead of Alan Moore. Look, no one's infallible. Not everyone's going to write at their top tier. Even some of my favorite authors, they write some drag at times. It's just the nature of the creative process. But I will say, when Alan Moore writes at his very best, it is the greatest comic prose I've ever read.
Yep.
And I would not even consider what we've been discussing his very best, and it is still a top-tier comic and a criminally underrated run. And I think for all the reasons we've discussed, while I would say, yes, check out V for Vendetta or Miracle Man to precede this, still check this out. This is a fantastic run. And if you're someone who, I don't know why you would be listening to this, if you're skeptical of superhero comic books and what they're capable of, read this. This is what makes superhero comics a great medium.
A genre in a medium.
A genre.
Yeah.
Medium. Yes.
Anything else to say, Nice Man?
Just a couple of things. I also think that this is a great arc to ever show a skeptical person, who doubts how comics can be very high quality. I was there when Captain Britain was first created by Chris Claremont and Herb Trimpe. I happened to be living in England at the time, and I bought that first issue. Thought it was nothing special. So of course Alan Moore takes even a dorky character like Captain Britain, boring, and turns it into something really great. In this arc also, I wanted to mention Jim Jaspers one more time. So when Alan Moore has created Mad Jim Jaspers and he's warping reality and it just gets worse and worse and everything else. And then I wonder if he thought ahead of time how he's going to bring Jim Jaspers down, or whether he was going along thinking, well, I better come up with something, because what could be a more perfect resolution than to say, well, let's see, Jim Jaspers is like a god. He can warp reality. Whatever he can warp, he can do it. Let's switch to nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
And now he has nothing to warp. And the realization on his face, like, shit, there's nothing I can warp here. And the god suddenly becomes exactly what he is, scrawny little pathetic little man. And I love the, what shall we call it? The stoicism of the Fury, who just kind of like stands there while Jim Jaspers is getting the realization, crap, this is it. I've got nothing. And the Fury's just like completely silent, and then it's like fries him. What a perfect resolution. I'd like to ask Alan Moore, did you think of that when you created Jim Jaspers? I'm going to turn him into a reality warping, absolute madman, godlike. And so how am I going to, let me think ahead of time how I'm going to bring him down? Or were you well into this thinking, crap, I've got to come up with something. What am I going to come up with? Perfect, isn't it? Absolutely perfect. And so many things that Alan Moore does, they're perfect. There have been like a million Green Lantern stories. Along comes Alan Moore. Oh, Alan Moore, you're doing a short Green Lantern story. Yes, I am. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm having I think the Guardians like pick out a Green Lantern on an alien world. All right, what's the big deal? Well, there's no light.
It's brilliant. And we will be reviewing that, so we're not going to reveal how he resolves that.
All right, good interception.
But
I do want to mention one thing. Even better than what you said, Alan Moore did not create him. Alan Moore used the character that was actually created by David Thorpe and Alan Davis. So Alan Moore took this character.
Oh, you mean this? I thought you meant the Green
one?
Lantern. Okay.
No, Jim Jaspers.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, Jim Jaspers, yes, right.
Yeah.
Which I
Right.
think is brilliant. And I just want to say I commend Alan Moore for taking what could be a one-note character and doing something fantastic with him.
Yes, exactly. That's really the point. It really is. So the final thing to say about Alan Moore, if I have at this point in time a favorite single issue, you might think I'm going to say, well, Watchmen 1, Watchmen 5, whatever. But I think it's the special he did for Mr. Majestic. Have you ever read it? It's the end of the universe.
Image, yes, Image, yes. Or Wildstorm, yeah. That was brilliant. Yeah.
Mr. Majestic, one-off, end of the universe, end of all that is. And I finished that comic book and I thought, wow, that's a comic book.
I'll tell you right now, we're going to get to this in a very future episode, far, far away. Some of my favorite Alan Moore comics are for Awesome Comics. We mentioned Youngblood. I also loved Glory, which was never officially released the way it was supposed to. And then also, do you remember Judgment Day?
Mm-mm.
Judgment Day was to Awesome Comics what Crisis on Infinite Earths was to DC. But it was only 3 issues long, and it was all in the form of a trial. And each time a witness would give a story, it would flash back to like a story, and it would be drawn by a different artist, the same way he did for Supreme. And we are going to review it because, like you said, Paul, about Mr. Majestic, I was reading that when it was being published, and I thought it was the most brilliant thing I'd ever read, and nobody on earth has read it.
Right,
So,
except you and me.
Right, exactly. So I want to thank Adamantium and Niceman for joining me again. So be sure to join us next week and every week And until the next time, see you later.